John Stamos was arrested in Beverly Hills. Basically, people called police saying he was driving erratically and behaving strangely. They pulled him over, they arrested him, and then they actually took him to the hospital and later released him.
John Stamos spent 40 years being America's favorite uncle, the man with the perfect hair, the easy smile, the picture of charm on national television. But behind that image was a secret he buried for nearly 4 decades. Netflix's Fuller House is like a porn parody without the porn. What does I mean, what? It's a nice turn to the phrase. No, it's not nice. There's a real porn that just came out. It's called Full Holes. Full of holes. Yeah. Hey. Whoa. In 2023, at age 60, he finally told the truth about what happened when he was 11. About the babysitter nobody knew about. About the drinking that followed, about the 2015 music arrest that almost ended everything, and then getting behind the wheel. John Stamos was arraigned today on a charge of driving under the influence. And about the loss in 2022 that finally broke him into speaking. What he revealed will change the way you see Uncle Jesse forever. In terms of their business, vodka. Yeah. Just yeah. And you know why? You know why he did that? Why? 'Cause he has a small o, that's actually the reason. You obviously don't take criticism. Well, laughter, I do. Believe me, I make fun of myself more than anything. But John Philip Stamos was born on August 19, 1963 in Cypress, California, a quiet, Orange County town that sat only about 25 miles from Hollywood, yet felt very far from the world of stars and studios. His father, William Bill Stamos, ran a local fast casual restaurant and came from a Greek immigrant family whose original name, Stamatopoulos, had been shortened to Stamos, music, so it would fit more easily on American forms, menus, and signs. That small change carried a bigger story inside it, and John grew up with that story around him. He watched his father spend long days behind the counter, often working 12 to 14 hours, and he learned early that effort, sat underneath every good thing in life. At home, there was another influence shaping him just as strongly. His mother, Loretta Phillips Stamos, had worked as a model before settling into family life, and she brought grace, style, and confidence into the house. So while his father came home smelling like fries and hard work, his mother moved through the world with polish and presence. That mix stayed with John. Part of him belonged to the restaurant where work was real and constant, and part of him leaned toward performance, image, and the thrill of being seen. Years later, people would recognize some of that spark in Uncle Jesse, and it made sense because John had already been watching that kind of charm at home long before he ever stepped onto a set. He was the oldest of 3 children with 2 younger, sisters, Janine and Elena, who later chose steady lives as school teachers in California instead of following him into fame. That difference would matter much later. When his life began to slip after his 2015 DUI arrest, it was not a manager or a producer who stepped in first. It was his sisters. They drove him to rehab and stayed close during detox. And that says a lot about the foundation he came from. Even after fame pulled him into a very public life, family remained the place he returned to when things grew dark. Before acting took over, music had already reached him in a deep way. Around the age of 13, he was in the garage playing drums, using whatever he could get his hands on. Then in 1976, he went to a Beach Boys concert at the Universal Amphitheater, and that night changed the way he saw his future. Their songs felt close to home because he, was growing up in Southern California, surrounded by the same sun, roads, and easy summer feeling their music celebrated. After that, he practiced with real hunger. He played on cheap kits, on pots, on pans, on anything that made sound. What began as teenage obsession would later turn into something almost unbelievable. By 1985, he was on stage with the Beach Boys playing Barbara Ann. And that connection would stay with him for decades. Even with all that drive, his start was still very ordinary. His parents were not agents, producers, or people with useful Hollywood, connections. They were simply a hardworking Greek-American father and a mother who understood beauty and presentation. So when John turned 18 and decided, music, to put off college, the choice carried real risk. He worked at his father's restaurant, music, flipping burgers and saving money while making trips into Los Angeles to audition. There was no safety cushion waiting for him. Still, he kept going, and that decision paid off much faster than anyone around him could have guessed. There was no safety cushion waiting for him. Still, he kept going, and that decision paid off much faster than anyone around him could have guessed. In early 1982, he landed his first major role as Blackie Parrish on General Hospital. For a kid who had been bussing tables, music, only months earlier, the shift was huge. He was suddenly appearing in one of the biggest daytime shows in America, a series pulling in around 14 to 15 million viewers in the early 1980s. Snorts, he made his first appearance on January 25, 1982 at just 19 years old. Blackie had been planned as a short role, but audiences responded so strongly, music, that the character stayed. Viewer mail rose, producers noticed, and the young actor from Cyprus found himself standing in front of a national audience almost overnight. Success kept building from there. In 1983, he received a Daytime Emmy nomination for Outstanding Music Supporting Actor in a Drama Series, which was a remarkable early sign of recognition for someone barely into his 20s. Music, around the same period, Soap Opera Digest honored him in both 1982 and 1983. And by the time he turned 21 in August 1984, he already had more industry attention than many actors spent years trying to earn. Those early wins gave him momentum. Yet, they also pushed him into a strange new kind of visibility. Fan magazines, music, such as Tigerb, 16, and Teen Beat began putting him on their covers, and mail rooms filled with letters, photos, and marriage proposals from admirers. In those years before the internet, fame looked physical and loud. It showed up in packed malls, screaming crowds, and stacks, music, of fan mail that seemed to never stop. During his time on General Hospital, he also shared scenes with Demi Moore, who at that point was still at the beginning of her own climb. She played reporter Jackie Templeton from 1982 to Music, 1984, and both of them left the soap in the same year, just before their careers took off in different directions. Looking back now, those episodes feel like a time, music, capsule. They captured two young performers before the larger world fully knew their names. Then came the kind of decision that often shapes a whole career. In 1984, Music, while he was still very popular on General Hospital, Stamos chose, Music, to leave. That choice went against advice he had been given, and later he said executive producer Gloria Monty warned him that leaving could end his future in town. Even so, he walked away and moved into prime time with the CBS series Dreams. The show lasted only 12 music episodes before it was canceled. And for a moment, the gamble looked painful. Yet, that step mattered because it showed something important about him. He was willing to risk security, music, in search of something bigger. That bigger moment arrived on September 22, Music, 1987 when Full House premiered. You know all the right spots. Has Uncle Jesse been a bad boy? Laughter. John Stamos was only 24, but Uncle Jesse quickly became one of the most memorable, music, parts of the show. At first, the character was named Jesse Cochran, though Stamos later pushed to change the surname to Katsopoulos, Music, in Season 2 so it would reflect his Greek heritage more honestly. That detail, music, may seem small, though it gave the character a little more of the man behind him. As Snorts, the show grew, music, so did Jesse. The leather jackets, the hair, the Elvis obsession, the catchphrase "Have mercy." All of it helped turn him into one of the most recognizable television figures of the late 1980s and early 1990s. The series ran for 8 seasons from September 22, 1987 to May 23, 1995, producing 192 music episodes and reaching millions of viewers every week. During its strongest years, it drew around 15 music to 20 million viewers and became a major part of ABC's TGIF lineup. Then syndication gave it a second life, introducing Uncle Jesse to children born long after the final episode had aired. Because of that, Stamos never simply had a successful sitcom role. He became part of a cultural memory that kept renewing itself with each new generation. The warmth people felt on screen had something real behind it. Stamos' music grew especially close to Bob Saget and Dave Coulier during the show's long run, and that bond deepened over time. They worked long days together, sometimes 12 to 14 hours, and the friendship, music, became more than a workplace connection. Stamos later described Saget as a brother. And when Saget, music, died suddenly on January 9, 2022 in Orlando at age 65, the loss hit him with full force. He said he felt, music, broken. And in his 2023 memoir, he described it as losing a piece of his own past. That grief carried weight because it came from a friendship built over years, not from a temporary Hollywood partnership. Full House also opened another door that connected directly back to his childhood. His love for the Beach Boys had never gone away. And now, music, his fame helped bring that part of his life closer to the center. He had first played drums with the band in 1985, and later his connection with them showed up inside the show itself, especially in episodes like Beach Boy Bingo and Jesse and Rebecca's Wedding. Members of the band appeared as themselves, and the line between John Stamos, the actor, and John Stamos, the musician, started to blur in a way that, music, felt natural. He was not leaving one dream behind for the other. Instead, one part of his life kept feeding the next. Even so, fame brings its own pressure, and success, music, can leave a mark that is hard to escape. As the years passed, Uncle Jesse became both a gift and a shadow. Stamos later admitted that people in casting rooms often still saw that character first, and he spent time trying to push beyond the image that had made him famous. That tension helps explain why he moved into theater after Full House ended. "I just made out with a monkey." Laughter, "Did you see that?" And "Honey, I think I learned a few tricks from Ginger." "Get over here." "Whoa. I knew I should have knocked." "There you are." "Okay, come on. Come to your buddy Joey." "Oh man, she hates me. Why won't that monkey give me a break?" "I don't know, but if you talk sexy to her, she'll nibble on your ear." In March 1995, he stepped onto Broadway in How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying at the Richard Rodgers Theater, taking over the role of J. Pierpont Finch. This was not a casual side project. He was doing 8 live performances a week in front of about 1,400 people per show, proving to critics and audiences that he could carry a stage as well as a television set. He kept building on that. In 2000, he took on the role of the MC in the Broadway revival of Cabaret, a part that asked for darkness, seduction, and emotional risk. It was a very different world from the warmth of Full House, and that was part of the point. He wanted to stretch. He wanted to show range. Music, he wanted people to see more than the leather jacket and the catchphrases. Later he also, music, joined the Broadway production of Nine, further strengthening his standing in theater and showing that his career could move in more than one direction at once. Around the same period, he found another way to stay close to the music that had mattered to him since his teens. By the mid-1980s, he had already begun touring with the Beach Boys. And in 1988, he even appeared in their Cuckoo video. Then in 2000, he took on a different role by co-producing The Beach Boys, An American Family, Music, an ABC miniseries about the band's rise, conflict, pain, and creative force. The project earned an Emmy nomination, and that mattered because it placed his name in a new category. He was no longer only performing inside stories. He was helping shape them. While his professional, music, life kept moving, his personal life became far more complicated. He met Rebecca Roman in 1994, and their relationship quickly became one of Hollywood's most watched pairings. They got engaged on Christmas Eve in 1997 and married on September 19, 1998. From the outside, they seemed polished and secure, the kind of couple, music, magazines love to photograph. Yet inside the marriage, strain was quietly growing. Later, Stamos wrote that, Music, they had secretly separated around March 2003 and kept that reality private for about a year while trying to repair things. By the time the split became public in 2004, the relationship had already been damaged for quite some time. He filed for divorce on August 19, 2004, and it was finalized in March 2005. That breakup hit him hard. In later interviews, and in his 2023 memoir, If You Would Have Told Me, he spoke openly about how deeply it shook him. He described feeling betrayed and humiliated, and he admitted that his way of coping in those years grew unhealthy. Drinking became heavier. Anger lasted longer than it should have. Pain stayed with him in a form he did not know how to handle. Rebecca Romaine later said she felt, music, blindsided by some of the way their story was framed in his memoir, which shows how differently the two of them carried the same ending. Still, from his side, the marriage did not simply end and fade. It broke something open that he struggled with for years. That pain did not arrive alone. It came while he was also carrying deep family grief. His father, Bill Stamos, died on July 6, 2001 at the age of 65. More than a decade later in September, Music, 2014. His mother, Loretta, died at 75. He loved her deeply and later called her the love of his life, words that reveal how much of his emotional center had always been tied to family. By then, he had lost both parents in his first marriage. And those losses settled into him in a heavy way. In June 2015, he was arrested for DUI in Beverly Hills after driving erratically. And that moment became a breaking point. It forced him, Music, to face the shape his life had taken and pushed him toward rehab. For most of his life, John Stamos looked, Music, like the man who had everything under control. He had the smile, the timing, Music, the charm, and the kind of face people trusted right away. Yet, behind that image, there was something he had buried so deeply that even he did not fully understand what it had done to him. In October 2023, only days before his memoir came out, Stamos revealed that when he was around 10 or 11 years old, he had been sexually abused by a babysitter while growing up in California. He had kept that part of his life hidden for nearly 40 years. Through the rise that began with General Hospital in 1982, through the years of Full House, and through the long afterlife of reruns and nostalgia, he never spoke about it in public. He later said he had packed it away so completely that writing his memoir, If You Would Have Told Me, was what finally forced him to face how wrong it was and how much damage it had left behind. That silence did not stay in childhood. It followed him into adult life and shaped it in ways he did not fully see at the time. He has said he told no one when the abuse happened. And because that pain stayed hidden, it kept showing up in other forms. During interviews in 2023, he openly connected that old wound to years of drinking, denial, and self-destructive choices. He explained that by the time he reached his late 50s, he finally began to understand that the trauma and the addiction were part of the same story. The therapists he worked with while writing the book helped him see a pattern that had been there for decades. And once he saw it, he could no longer pretend the pieces were unrelated. That realization became even sharper when he spoke about the role of psychiatrist Phil Stouts. Stamos had spent years trying to manage parts of his life without truly getting to the center of it. And that only changed when he began doing deeper, music, work with Stouts. In a 2024 interview, he said something striking. He admitted that without that help, he probably would not be here. Coming from someone the public had long associated with ease and confidence, the line carried real weight. He credited Stouts with pushing him to stop treating his drinking, his broken relationships, and his buried childhood trauma as separate problems. Once they were placed on the same timeline, the shape of his life looked very different. When If You Would Have Told Me was released on October 24, 2023, many people first expected another celebrity memoir, Music, filled with career stories and Hollywood memories. Some of that was there, of course, but one chapter changed the way the entire book was read. The section where he described the abuse quickly became the part people talked about most because it changed the meaning of so many things that had come before. For years, Stamos had been seen as the playful heartthrob with the good hair and the easy laugh. Suddenly, his struggles with alcohol, his 2015 music, DUI, and his later advocacy for abused children felt connected in a way the public had never understood before. The polished image was still real in its own way. But now, it stood beside a much darker truth that had been there all along. The thing that finally pushed him to tell that truth was loss. Stamos has said he never planned to write a memoir. That changed on January 9, 2022, when Bob Saget was found dead in a hotel room in Florida at age 65. Saget's sudden death shook him hard. By then, Stamos was also a father, and those two facts pressed on him at the same time. In interviews, he described reaching a point where he had to ask himself, music, when he would speak honestly, if not now. The book stopped being a career project and became something more urgent. He later said that writing it felt like therapy and that Saget's death forced him to face a terrifying thought. If he stayed silent much longer, the truth might die with him. That same pattern of hidden pain and public collapse came into even sharper focus when people looked back at his 2015 DUI. At the time, it was easy to treat it as a celebrity scandal, another ugly headline, another public embarrassment. Still, for Stamos, it became the break in his image that forced a deeper reckoning. On the night of June 12, 2015, music, police in Beverly Hills received 911 calls about a black Mercedes SUV swerving near Cannon Drive and Brighton Way, close to Rodeo Drive. When officers stopped the car, they found 51-year-old John Stamos alone behind the wheel and so out of it that they first thought he might be having a medical emergency. He was taken to Cedars-Sinai before he was formally arrested. Hospital tests later showed drugs in his system, including GHB, which he later said he had used while trying to lean out for a role. The arrest became instant tabloid fuel. His mugshot spread fast, and the man, long known as television's cool uncle, suddenly looked lost, exposed, and deeply unsteady. Even then, the real bottom came later. Stamos has said that the lowest point was not the arrest itself, but what happened after he got home. Instead of stopping, he opened a full bottle of wine and drank it alone. By then, his face was already on the news, and he knew charges were coming, but he still kept numbing himself. In interviews around his 2023 memoir, he admitted that he did not sober up in the weeks right after the DUI. He kept going. That frightened him because it forced him to see the distance between the version of himself he had always carried and the man he had become. He grew up in a close Greek-American family in Cypress, California. And that family had always taken pride in being steady and grounded. Looking at his own life, then he saw a painful split that he later described as the darkest period he had known. The turning point did not come from the court or, music, the press. It came from family. Nearly a month, music, passed after the arrest, and during that time, he was still drinking, still working, and still acting as if he could manage it alone. Then his older sisters, Janine and Elena, stepped in. According to Stamos, they had already found a treatment center and simply told him it was time to go. That moment hit him hard because the message came from the people who knew him before the fame, before the image, before all the damage had piled up. In July 2015, he entered a 30-day residential treatment program. The move pulled him out of the spotlight and into a much harsher kind of honesty. Inside rehab, he could no longer hide inside the role people knew him for. He was no longer Uncle Jesse or the charming actor who could, music, smooth things over with a joke. He was a middle-aged man facing addiction hedon. He has described those early days as dark. And the word feels careful because it contains so much pain without trying to decorate it. He had to sit in meetings, listen to counselors dissect his drinking, his ego, and the habits that had kept him trapped, and accept that the life he had built could not continue in the same way. He faced legal consequences, too, including probation and mandatory alcohol education. But the deeper punishment was internal. He had to rebuild himself in front of an audience that had watched him for decades. By the end of that month, he had moved from calling himself a guy who partied too much to admitting something much more serious. He was an alcoholic and he needed structure if he wanted to survive. That new structure slowly became the foundation of a different life. By late 2023, Stamos was able to say he had been sober for music about 8 years. He spoke often about the three forces that kept him grounded. Though what mattered most was how those parts of his life held together. His wife Caitlin McHugh Stamos became a stabilizing presence. Their son Billy gave him a sense of purpose he had never known before. I still don't know where he came from. He looks nothing like either of us. He doesn't look anything like us. And I stare at his face sometimes going like how even just be trying to find you in there. I don't. There might have been a switch at the hospital. I don't know. But I'm not giving music him back now. We're stuck with him now. Phil Stutz remained a major guide. At one point, Stutz hit him with a brutally direct line about how good that growth soon carried into another part of his life that he had once seemed almost built to avoid. In October 2017, at age 54, he proposed to Caitlin McHugh, who was 31. He rented out Disneyland for the evening and planned a proposal built around a custom Little Mermaid-style montage. The age gap was 23 years, and by then he had only been sober for music about 2 years. Still, people close to him later said this relationship felt different from the start because he was truly present in it. He was not drifting through it. He was not covering himself with charm while staying emotionally unavailable. He showed up sober from day one, and that changed everything. He later described Caitlin as the spark that made him want a quieter and more rooted life. Then less than 6 months after that proposal, another change arrived. On April 4, 2018, John and Caitlin welcomed their son, William Christopher Stamos, known as Billy. John was 54. Caitlin was 32. The timing mattered because Billy's birth came almost exactly 3 years after the DUI arrest that had thrown his life into public chaos. Stamos has spoken about that contrast with striking honesty. Only a few years earlier, he was a man who barely seemed to care what happened to him. Now he was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning with a baby, changing diapers, pushing a stroller, and stepping into a life that would have once seemed impossible for him. The name Billy carried its own emotional weight. He named his son after his father, William Stamos, who died in 2001 at age 65. At that time, John was 38 and still moving, music, through life under the shadow of drinking and instability. In his memoir, he reflected on the fact that his father never got to see him sober, settled, or living with the kind of maturity he eventually found. Naming his son William was deeply personal because it gave that name a second life inside a new kind of home, one shaped by care, recovery, and presence. For Stamos, that choice was not small. It connected the father he had lost to the version of himself he was still trying to become. Fatherhood itself hit him with a force he had not expected. He has called becoming a dad the greatest thing that ever happened to him. And the line feels meaningful because he had once seemed almost resigned to never having that life. Before sobriety, he joked about Peter Pan syndrome and sometimes spoke as though he had already done everything worth doing. By 2018, his world had shifted in a much more ordinary and much more profound direction. He was arranging work around family life, thinking about school pickups, and building a daily rhythm that had very little to do with the old celebrity version of himself. That change was not glamorous. Yet it seems to have saved him in a way glamour never could. Even his work during that period now looks different in hindsight. Fuller House premiered on February 26, 2016 and ended on June 7, 2020. Stamos appeared in 17 episodes, and some of that time overlapped with Caitlin's pregnancy and Billy's first years. On the surface, it was a return to a familiar world, a reunion with the television family people loved. Yet, after Bob Saget's death in January 2022, those years took on a new emotional meaning. What once felt like a nostalgic project began to look more like a final chapter, a last season of togetherness before one of the central figures was suddenly gone. For Stamos, those taping days now seemed to carry the softness and sadness of a goodbye that no one knew was a goodbye. Saget's death continued to echo in private ways, too. On January 9, 2022, he was found unresponsive in his room at the Ritz-Carlton Orlando, hours after music, performing in Jacksonville and posting online that he was loving. Every minute of being back on tour. He was 65. The medical examiner later ruled that he died from blunt head trauma caused by an accidental fall with no drugs or alcohol involved. The details made the loss feel even stranger because such a huge public figure was gone in such an ordinary and lonely way. For Stamos, who had spoken with him not long before, the news hit with tremendous force. In the months that followed, grief settled into his routine in an unusual form. He began listening at night to Saget's 2014 memoir audiobook, Dirty Daddy, just to fall asleep to his friend's voice. He later said that hearing him joke and ramble gave him comfort. The habit turned into something deeply personal. It was a way of keeping Saget near, a way of filling the silence after a sudden loss. That still did not feel real. Through that ritual, grief became part memory, part companionship, part refusal to let go. That loss also sharpened his sense of time. Stamos has said that Saget's death was what finally, music, forced him to write his memoir. By then he was nearing 60 himself, and the shock of losing a close friend at 65 pushed him to confront how quickly life could close. The book stopped being optional. It became a way to preserve the truth before another sudden ending made that impossible. Once he understood that, the silence he had held for so long became harder to defend. The years that followed brought even more reminders of how fragile, music, everything is. On November 18, 2024, while flying to Detroit to visit Dave Coulier, Stamos received a text from the brother of his childhood best friend, Mike Owen. The message simply told him to call. He asked if Mike was okay and got back one crushing, music, answer. No. Owen, the friend he had known since age 11, had died suddenly of a heart attack. Stamos later said it felt like losing a piece of music himself. And that makes sense because some people carry the part of us that existed before fame, before public identity, before reinvention. When one of those people disappears, the loss cuts in a very deep way. Only days later, another blow followed. Dave Coulier had been diagnosed with stage 3 non-Hodgkin lymphoma at age 65. The illness was serious, though doctors reportedly believed it was highly treatable. Coulier shaved his head as he prepared for chemotherapy, and Stamos responded in a way that showed how close that bond still was. He posted a photo of himself wearing a bald cap to mirror Coulier's look, calling it a sign of love and solidarity. The gesture was playful on the surface, yet it came from a place of real fear and real affection. By then, the Full House cast was no longer just a symbol of sitcom warmth for the public. For Stamos, they were the people tied to some of the deepest chapters of his adult life, and seeing them suffer made that impossible to ignore.